Hello and welcome to another Atypical Philosopher video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine War Update Extra video giving you all the nuggets to get your teeth into, the juicy bits of information and context to allow you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. I keep having to repeat myself on the introduction, but also on a lot of general points, because I must remember that not everyone has come along with me on this journey. Some people will be watching my videos, every video I produce, for the first time. So this is why, if you're a long-time listener of my channel in terms of the Ukraine war, I will repeat myself for that particular reason. Okay, I'm going to start, and I don't know, we'll see how it goes, as the entire video might be about Kherson. It might not, depends how quickly I go through it. I did want to talk about fascism today, but that may have to wait till tomorrow or another day. So let's start with Kherson, and I wanted to just pay some props to, a bit of kudos to commenters on my most recent video, this morning's video. In fact, commenters in general on my Ukraine war videos are brilliant. You guys are the best of YouTube, because let's face it, YouTube and commenters have a pretty checkered history. I mean, there's some a lot of trash out there, but you guys are brilliant in the main. And this point, I talked, what's this all about? Well, I talked this morning about how just trying to understand really what was going on with the strategizing behind what Ukraine did, why they didn't attack earlier, why they didn't mop up more of the people here and engage with them and steal or capture, lots of pieces of equipment. It seems like they let Ukraine go. Some people are saying, a lot of people are saying, there's been an agreement between the two sides, because it looks like Russia got away with it, got their troops off this sort of area of land across the river and got most of their equipment across. We are seeing some equipment being captured, but it's generally equipment that's abandoned because it wasn't working, or it had been damaged, or it had already been completely blown up in previous encounters. So it's trying to understand what's going on here. Now, the first thing is, how many troops did the Ukrainians have? The stats for the Russians was somewhere between 20 and 40,000 troops. Let's go to the top end, 40,000 troops. The general received belief about attacking forces is that you need at least 3-1 in rural areas. You could say this is pretty much a rural area in this area. So maybe 3-1, going up if you're attacking urban areas. So 5-1, 9-1, that kind of area. Here, you would say 3-1. So if there are 40,000 Russians, you would expect there to be 120,000 Ukrainians. Now, there weren't 120,000 Ukrainians there. I can pretty much guarantee that. They just don't have the forces to amass that kind of capacity of troops. There would not have been 120,000. Some people are saying 60,000. 60,000 is the highest I've heard of a decent estimation, but it could be less than that. Now, if you have 40,000 Russian troops, and they are pretty good troops in the main, and you have 60,000 Ukrainian troops, attacking would have been hugely costly for the Ukrainians. So somebody put a comment this morning which basically explains, in my opinion, almost all of what's happened in Kherson. So props to Chris Brown, who have said, "Hi Jonathan, thanks for another great report. The capture of Kherson was part of a larger Ukrainian strategy that had the reduction in their own casualties as a very high priority." And that sentence alone just does it. That explains everything. So if they wanted, and someone else has commented before, you'll say who it was, I can't remember, to say that what Ukrainians' major concern is territory. It's not anything else, it's territory. And so therefore they're not so bothered about killing the most amount of troops or taking the most amount of vehicles and taking out Russian capabilities and capacities in the long term. They want their territory back, because if they get their territory back, then they have their country back. And so if it was about destroying Russian troops, they would have attacked. But in doing that, they would have lost more of their own troops. If you understand their rationale in the context of the capture of Kherson was part of a larger Ukrainian strategy, and this is their strategy all over the shop, arguably, that had the reduction in their own casualties as a very high priority. So if you understand that, then you understand what they did here, which is fix the troops in here until and take out all the supply and hit the Kerch Bridge down here, doing all of that, hitting the bridges and pontoon crossings and ferries consistently over a long period of time, then Surovikin, who was in charge of the Russian army, had no choice but to eventually put his troops out. In other words, Kherson won this whole area back without really committing to a large-scale battle. What they were doing were recon with force attacks to gather information on defenses consistently over weeks, which were costly. And even those attacks, people recognized generally that they were costly attacks. So the Ukrainians lost a lot of troops around this area, and they didn't fully commit. And they didn't fully commit because they had their own troop number and a reduction in losses of their own troop numbers as their major objective. And the Russians pulled out and they left some equipment behind. And I was saying earlier on today that that's a really successful withdrawal. And it was allowed to be a successful withdrawal because that priority of the Ukrainians, they just didn't want to lose their troops. Now, if that's their objective, then this is incredibly successful for the Ukrainians. Yes, they didn't take out a load of Russian troops. Yes, they didn't take out as much equipment as possible. But did they lose the fewest amount of troops conceivable in such a maneuver? Arguably, yes. The Ukrainians lost very few troops considering the amount of gain of land they got. All you need to do is consider the troops lost to the amount of land gained here in Kherson and compare that to the Russians in Bakhmut, where you're talking, or Avdiivka, where you're talking meters over months at a loss that is, some people are estimating at 5 to 1 or 10 to 1 Russian casualties to Ukrainian. In other words, hugely inefficient, hugely wasteful, and very little gain, very ineffective. Whereas this, hugely effective for the amount of land they have gained and the number of troops they have lost. So I needed to switch my paradigm to say it's not about the amount of Russian troops that are taken out and equipment that's taken out, but the amount of Ukrainian troops who weren't lost. That now explains everything. There was something that wasn't sitting right with me, and this is why I was a bit harsh this morning by saying this was a really successful withdrawal, and I think Kherson, the Ukrainians have lost an opportunity here. But that one comment just suddenly made everything click into place. Right, I get it now. Because it's so important for their morale and for their country as a whole not to lose troops. Those big troop losses would be a massive issue for them domestically. So I'm happy to be enlightened here and to rejig my view on this. This is what this whole project is about. Yes, it's about giving information to you guys, but it's also, I used to say this when I did a lot of blogging and article writing, and I'm still a journalist now. The part of that process is putting my thoughts out there so that other people can attack them, in order that I then come to a greater understanding of reality and can change my views according to the criticisms I get. This is like performance feedback revision. So it's a bit like how evolution works. If I perform, I get feedback, I revise. I then reperform, get feedback, revise. So this is, yes, it's about information for you guys, but it's also about receiving information back for me to rejig my ideas. And in light of that, I'm now going to move on to the next thing, which is someone else giving their views, which are wrong. And I'm going to now show you why they are wrong, and hopefully they will revise their own opinions. So this, but I won't say who it was. This is one of my regular commenters on the channel who is broadly pro-Russia, I think, but certainly not clearly pro-Ukrainian. And this is to do with the crowds in Kherson who have been celebrating liberation and coming out and going, way. So, Jonathan, in regards to greeting soldiers by civilians, you simply follow wishful thinking. Of course, Russians will welcome. That's the nature of a population with mixed preferences. If you miss that, then this is because your sources are already filtered. So you commit all the errors a Bible believer may do. It is embarrassing. So attacking me because I'm not obviously a philosopher of religion, I attack certain positions or whatever. So he's trying to get me on my own ground here. And of course, this is basically utterly wrong. So I do have confirmation bias, and I do take a biased look at sources, of course, as we all do. It's the nature of the beast. But I also do try and mitigate that, and I do look at Russian sources as much as, well, not probably as much as I can, but to a good degree. Now, here, what this guy is saying is that, hey, those videos of Ukrainians celebrating, there are those where when the Russians came into certain areas in the Donbass and liberated those areas and other areas, and you just haven't watched them because your sources are filtering out those videos, or you are not looking at the correct sources. And this is basically nonsense. I mean, in principle, it could be correct. It's just not correct because that just aren't the videos. And I'll talk about that in a second. And that some of the videos that there are, and he goes on to say back to me, is like, "Are you going to be talking about how these are staged?" And I'm going to give you evidence of how something is staged in a second. So let's look, and I could do this for hours. There are so many videos out there, so I'll do a really quick look through the sorts of videos we see of liberated Kherson and compare this to liberated other areas of Ukraine where the Russians have gone in. Okay, so no, I'll come back to that later. So this is the one I showed you this morning. I don't know how many people that is, but you are talking tens and tens of thousands. Okay? This is videos like this that sparked Russians to go, the 87.05% of people in the referendum that's in Kherson that supported Russian occupation or Russian control or Russian governance can't be right, because this plays merry havoc with that statistic. The other thing to think about is, and just this will make sense later. So I keep saying this to you guys. It's about the little details. If you want to start picking holes or starting to understand certain arguments or positions or this and that, look at the little details. The little details for me are, look at the flags here. Look at all of the Ukrainian flags. This will, as I say, will become obvious later. Almost all the flags are draped around people. Very few have flag poles, and those that do are different. All of these Ukrainian flags are broadly different. They're from different places. They're just flags that people have got from various points in time, so on and so forth. And continue thinking about those flags as we go forward. Here's another video.
Ми в Херсоні. Люди починають зустрічатись, прапорами вітають.
Look at the number of people, all the different types of flags. Look at the different color of those colors, the different kind of hue of those Ukrainian flags. This is clearly spontaneous mobbing of cars and troops. Look at this, is genuine happiness. Okay, so that's another example. This done the rounds. Some being held, that's a different blue to that. That's got a insignia in the middle of the flag, all sort of different types of flags. Again, super happy people. This genuine joy. I think this might be relatives who have come back to their hometown. Thank you. Spasiba. All these people, genuine joy, just flowers on their heads, just, you know, lovely. Look at this old lady there thanking a soldier. We've got Kherson, people from Kherson in Kyiv getting together. Some people that are not even in Kherson, but are from Kherson. Happy singing, not chanting, singing. Just, you know, happiness. This is one of my favorites, so I want you to watch this. Just, it cut me up yesterday.
Все, вы контролируете.
So again, spontaneously stopping because they can't get through. All these, you know, locals.
Контролируй, чердаки.
Old ladies crying. Kids skipping. This lady here, love her. Full cross-section of society, old, young families, men, women, all sorts. Just and you can hear in the background singing. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's there in the background. Just genuine happiness. I mean, this is... Anyway, there you go. I love this. Just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I just hope she didn't mow down the people ahead. Brilliant. Modern cavalry charge. Fantastic. As I say, all of us today are a little bit of this aunt on a scooter. So, fantastic stuff. So now we're going to get on to Russia. So in Kherson, people's chanting slogans to welcome Russian army while walking past Russian Rosgvardia troops. So think about the singing, the joyful singing that we just had, and then compare it to this. Look at the lack of response from these guys. Certainly more troops than people. I mean, you can't really see the people. This video is more about the troops. So you get a little bit of chanting from people walking by, but you have no idea whether that is staged, whether, you know, the Russians have got that sorted for a video. It might have been genuine. You've got to remember there are pro-Russians all over, or there were pro-Russians to a larger degree at the beginning of the conflict, and this is where this video is coming from. So if this is in the Donbass, I don't know where this is from, you will get pro-Russians who will have been happy that these troops have come. But the idea that they are piling all of these boxes of goods, whatever they are, onto one single APC is very interesting, and it just makes me think it's a little bit staged. Someone has a pre-made child's poster. So in other words, they knew these guys were coming, and this is all... Is this all for camera? I don't know. We've got all this waiting, and they're all putting it onto one. Rather than spread it out to all these people, it isn't like, these are for you, I'm giving this to you. Or you've already got a load, let's go and give it to someone who might need it down here. It's like, right, we've got a load of stuff to give them. We've been told to give it to them. We're giving it to them, or whatever. I don't know. It just strikes me as just that little bit more staged, far less happiness, far less genuine joy at seeing these troops. Although these are probably pro-Russian, they're almost certainly pro-Russian, and to some degree happy to see the Russian soldiers. But again, look at the numbers. Okay. This is the important one, and this is the flag one, right? So when the guy before said, yeah, you're just going to say it's all staged, I look at this, and this is the video with the single largest amount of pro-Russians to compare with those Kherson liberation festivities and the happiness going on there. This is the single biggest crowd of Russians. Now look at the flags. There are two types of flags. They're all the same. They're 50-50. One is either one type of flag, the other is another type of flag. They're all on flagpoles, and they all look like they have been handed out. And the way they're holding them is just not spontaneous. It's just I know I'm belaboring this point, but But just look, for me, this is a photo opportunity. We are going to give you a whole bunch of flags, and you're going to stand there with all of the same flags. There's like 2, maybe 3 types of flags, all on flagpoles. In other words, these won't have been flags they already owned, that they just pulled them out of their drawer at home. Oh, I'm going to support these troops. Let's get that Russian flag we've got, the one you've had for 5 years stuffed in the drawer, the one you've got hanging on your wall in your bedroom or whatever. These have been handed to this bunch of people who have been brought together, and they are all the same sort of flags. So sorry, I just did that back. I didn't mean to do that. Just, I don't know.
Возвращением, ребята, как настроение?
Класс настроение. Домой. Самое главное домой. Победили домой.
It's just that no one that's not a spontaneous crowd. That's a crowd that's been pulled together, and they may all be pro-Russian. I'm not denying that these guys are pro-Russian. It's just that this is not spontaneity. That is absolutely not spontaneity. That is a prearranged piece of propaganda, and there's absolutely no doubt about that. And so when this person says blah 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 blah, it's embarrassing. No, actually, your opinion is embarrassing, because I can back up my opinion with evidence and rational arguments, and you can't. So there you go. I'm absolutely adamant that these sorts of videos that I have shown you are evidence that Russia should not be in Ukraine. And the Russians are starting to understand that as well. Anyway, moving on. This is a lovely video. Just they've got this aspirational train notice board, timetable board, or whatever, route board. And here they're waiting to basically turn it into white, which indicates that that route is now operational. And here we have Kyiv to Kherson is now on the cards. I think it's brilliant. Excellent. Love it. Okay, remaining in Kherson, here is an abandoned Russian position. And again, repeating myself, but for newbies here, you just need to look at the way they keep their camps. Yes, these would have been abandoned quite quickly. However, this is how they lived, clearly. Just absolute mess. An absolute mess. And I talked to you before about these little things that tell you a lot. It will be reflective of the command structures that they have, and the lack of decent command, and the lack of self-respect, and the lack of self-regulation, and all these sorts of things that show you that the Russian armed forces are in a lot worse shape than you would think. Like this, if someone lived like that, you would say something about their mental health. You know, hoarders, people that live in those really, and some of you might be like this, but live in complete tips at home, which is a reflective of your mental health, or where you're at in life, or whatever. Now, if you are a unit of people living like that, then that is reflective of your state of mind as a unit, but also the person who's in charge of you, or the people who are in charge of you. And the fact that they are not getting you to live in an orderly fashion means that there isn't an orderly command structure, I would argue. And this is just another video of the halls that the Ukraine, again, really messy camp here. But look, those big old halls of ammunition are going to be super useful for the Ukrainians, particularly as there'll be Soviet era stuff that they can use in their equipment, in their armaments that they have been running out of, and so they've been replacing with NATO. But this will be really good for the Ukrainians. They'll like that. Here's the Antonovsky Bridge, which was, everyone is now absolutely, you know, in there is a consensus that the bridge was blown up by the Russians, and it wasn't hit by HIMARS. HIMARS just wouldn't be able to do this huge amount of explosion. This is, explosive planted on the bridge. There have been several videos. This is one of the best ones now. I mean, it kind of goes dark as soon as it happens. It's just such a massive, bright explosion. Oh, I missed it. Sorry, I was trying to speed it up. It takes its time getting there. Bang. Poof. That is one massive, massive explosion. HIMARS would cause, a hole on that. That is, I don't know, 20 times the size of the explosive capacity of a HIMARS rocket, maybe. Just, yeah, that ain't getting hit by rockets. That is, and look at all the explosions over there. This is explosives, and the Russians are doing that so that Ukrainians can't use it to get across. And, for obvious reasons, this isn't a criticism of the Russians. The Ukrainians were in the same position. They would have done this. In fact, the Ukrainians had blown up plenty of bridges. It's not in the best interest for the Ukraine to blow up that bridge. It is in the best interest of the Russians. So the Russians did that, and there you go. Hey ho. And the other thing I wanted to say about Kherson is war crimes. They're starting to fight. Evidence of war crimes are already emerging in recent liberated areas of Kherson. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General sent a team of investigators to the Berislav district, where the bodies of at least 3 civilians with skull fractures were found in a cellar. Now, we know that there were repercussions for those who were thought to be collaborators, and it was all pretty harsh. Every time there were big hits on the Kherson area, there were repercussions for the locals who were thought to be providing information. But there is certainly, evidence. It seems that there is evidence of war crimes, and you would expect that given the form that the Russians have elsewhere in Ukraine. Okay, let's quickly run through a bunch of other stuff. So I don't know if you've heard, in Britain he's pretty famous. I don't know if the rest of you will have heard much about him. Aiden Aslin, who was caught earlier on in the war, captured, and then he was sentenced to death and then released in a prisoner exchange. He was a British guy who was actually living in Ukraine at the time and was fighting in the 2014 onwards conflict. And he was arrested and sentenced to death for being a mercenary, except he wasn't. I mean, he wasn't a mercenary. He was fighting. He was paid by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. So that was absolutely terrible. But he was returned after 50 days when the Saudi Crown Prince and Chelsea owner, or former Chelsea owner, Roman Abramovich, secured his release from a death sentence. Now, that's in there, looking a bit healthier than he was when he first came back. He is going back to Ukraine, and he's going to have a YouTube channel that he's going to be reporting through, and he's going to use his kind of knowledge and of Ukraine to go and do that. He said he's never going to pick up. I promised my fiance that I wouldn't go back to the military. I don't expect to ever pick up a weapon again. I know that I may be recognizable face in Ukraine, but I feel it's worth the risk. His motivation was his love for his adopted country of Ukraine. He wants to bring eyewitness accounts to a whole wide audience in the West, and to keep suffering in the public eye, to keep the suffering, of those Ukrainians in the public eye. Aiden, a serving soldier, was captured during the siege of Mariupol. With the ammunition and stocks of food and water gone, his unit was ordered to surrender. And that was, I won't go into that again, but, it must be really difficult if you are someone like that in that situation, and then coming back to Britain and thinking, what are my skill sets? What can I go out and get a job? PTSD, you've been tortured almost certainly in captivity. What do you do? There was a story of an American who did exactly that, tortured and then back out, and getting back on with it, because that's your way of dealing with it. So anyway, that's understandable, and I reckon that's a really good outlet for him. Talking about British people, David Ballantyne-Smith, British security guard who passed secrets to Russia, pleads guilty to spy charges. So he was arrested in Germany. So in conversations, David Ballantyne-Smith is said to have declared he hated the UK and Germany, and expressed anger at the flying of the rainbow flag in support of the LGBTQ plus community. So that again, that fits in with the fascistic scenario that we see that's really big in Russia. And I'll talk to that when I do talk about fascism, which won't be in this one because I won't have time. But actually, that idea is is really big in the Russian social media circles. Yeah, it's a fascinating way that there's all sorts of brainwashing going on, and that goes right down to the children, and then to, as I said yesterday, to unpick that is a generational thing. But anyway, so he, I hope he gets what he deserves. And here's something else to think about. So 2 trillion rubles per year was spent on mega yachts when they promised divisions of Armata tanks. So these are the T-14 tanks. The prototypes have never really actually got to the front lines or got built. Strategic bombers, hundreds of aircraft, and thousands of helicopters. Lots of promises from the Russians, didn't really get there, and they've attacked with this army, or been forced to attack because they didn't really envisage having a war in the first place. An army that is so ill prepared because it's full of really outdated and obsolete equipment, because the equipment that they promised would be built didn't get built because of corruption. Instead, they ended up with paper maps. So they're fighting with Soviet maps in these units, Chinese radios that they put covers over, but they've got these cheap Chinese radios on beneath. I think I showed in one of my very early videos those things, and mostly Nagants. Don't know what that is. Long live Russian corruption. 20 trillion down the drain. This is Moscow Times. Largest state arms production program in Russian history halted due to failures in Ukraine. It's just corruption. Corruption is a huge problem for them. So here we go. A few other things. This is Jack Detch, who's well worth following on Twitter. He says Biden admin is scrambling to meet Ukraine's request for electrical transformers and generators to keep the lights on after Russia's missile attacks targeting the power grid. They got caught a little flat-footed, said a senior congressional aide. And this is the idea that supporting Ukraine isn't just about military, equipment, munition, ordnance, all that kind of stuff. It's about allowing them to function as a whole society. They need to. There's no point them fighting a war on all these fronts if none of their population in the country as a whole have electricity or water. Just so, and this is what we go back to talk about aid. So we talk about how wonderful it is that X and Y country give these bits of aid, like and the flagship sort of tanks or APCs or this and that, helicopters or whatever. And then you have other countries giving substation components and electrical generators, and it looks like the first countries are doing a much better job because these are all like really shiny bits of equipment or whatever, but actually they're as important as each other. And it's very easy to look at an infographic that says this country's given 0 APCs and this country's given 0 RPGs and shells. Yeah, that tells you one part of the story, but not the whole story. And actually, there are countries that are giving loads of help in terms of being able to get Ukraine back on its feet for its debilitated, incapacitated electricity distribution network. So that's really important. Just slightly left field from there. Interesting that there have been seen some Israeli vehicles. No information about how these have appeared in Ukraine, but a couple of MRAPs, mine-resistant sort of personnel vehicles there, armored personnel vehicles. They are very useful, obviously, but these are Israeli ones. So, yeah, interesting. Worth raising the eyebrow to that. And just to finish off, I know I've overrun, so sorry about that. General Mark A. Milley, and this has caused a little bit of a storm, perhaps, in certain circles. General Mark A. Milley has made the case. Shashank Joshi is the defense correspondent for The Economist. The Economist has made the case in internal meetings that the Ukrainians have achieved about as much as they could reasonably expect on the battlefield before winter sets in. This is curious. Surely it depends on the prognosis for spring. So Milley, quote, has pointed to satellite imagery showing that the Russians are digging trenches and establishing firm lines through much of the occupied territory in preparation for winter. In White House discussions, Milley, cites World War I, when the two sides engage in years of trench warfare and little change in territory, but millions of pointless casualties. An example he aired in his speech. General Milley's judgment is not shared by Mr. Biden or Mr. Sullivan, the officials said. Mr. Putin has shown no willingness to negotiate, they said, and the Ukrainians have been emboldened by their success on the battlefield. Milley's comment might imply a few things. He may believe Russian mobilization will yield more combat power than is widely assumed. He may doubt Ukrainian offensive capacity. He may doubt ability to keep Ukraine supplied or solvent. None of these seem encouraging. So this is, some people are questioning, has Milley got it right? Is Milley being quite pessimistic here? About as much as he can achieve. So then you've got Edward Stringer, who is a retired RAF Air Marshal, trustee of the Imperial War Museum. So, a prominent UK military man. Caution says, don't opine, so don't give your opinion until you have the actual transcripts. But several retired UK generals were saying similar things before Kharkiv and Kherson. Their net assessments appear to me to be too binary, relying on overly simplistic force correlations and outdated heuristics. In other words, it's easy to think that there's no future. You've gone as far as you can get, and then Kharkiv happened, and then Kherson happened. Okay, but what could be next? Until you've got all of your information, and you know exactly what's going on. Be wary about, and I presume you're saying that to Mark Milley there. Just be wary about your conclusions. Which brings me on to the winter war idea. And I'll promise I'll leave you after this. This is a really good thread by the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, an American think tank. So Ukraine has the initiative and is securing a major victory in Kherson. The coming months are a window of opportunity for Ukraine to expand its gains and prevent Russia from consolidating its defenses, which a ceasefire would let Moscow do. A ceasefire would provide the Kremlin with the pause it desperately needs to reconstitute Russian forces, and fighting in Ukraine will not halt or enter a stalemate due to winter weather, despite faulty Western assumptions. Autumn and springtime mud can slow or halt military advantages, as can faulty or insufficient wintertime equipment. Some equipment may need to be adapted for colder weather, and shortages of equipment or ammo could slow advances due to logistical difficulties, not winter weather. Winter weather could disproportionately harm poorly equipped Russian forces in Ukraine, but well-supplied Ukrainian forces are unlikely to halt their counteroffensives due to the arrival of winter weather, and may be able to take advantage of frozen terrain to move more easily than they could do in muddy autumn months. If fighting does halt this winter, it will be due to logistical challenges and the culmination of several campaigns on both sides. The Russian campaigns of capture all of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia Oblast all culminated months ago, despite the repeated insistence of Russian forces on launching ineffective attacks. Think about Pavlivka there. And Russian forces are firmly on the defensive across most of the front line. Russian officials are busy attempting to train 120,000 conscripts to deploy to the front lines in the spring. Ukrainian forces likely aim to liberate as much occupied territory as possible before those Russian reinforcements arrive. A wintertime ceasefire would only benefit Russian forces, who would use that opportunity to bolster their faltering defenses and continue their genocidal campaign to eradicate Ukrainian identity in occupied parts of Ukraine. Bosh. The ISW, I think, have got it right there, that if they stop now thinking let's either have a formal ceasefire or pause for the winter months, this will play into the hands of Russia for multiple reasons more than it would for Ukraine. And Rob Lee, who's well worth following again on Twitter, says so actually, Rob Lee officially is a PhD student in war studies, senior fellow at a war institute, previously at lots of places focused on Russian defense policy. Okay, we shouldn't dismiss Ukraine's chances of achieving further gains over the winter. Russia's force is increasingly composed of involuntary soldiers, mobilized, stop loss, etc. Bad weather presents challenges, but also opportunities for Ukrainian units with better discipline and morale. Ukraine has demonstrated a greater ability to strike targets behind Russia's lines of SOF, partisans, UAVs, and precision fires than Russia. That means Ukraine can continue to raise costs for Russian forces and their occupation efforts, even if the front is relatively static. Plus, Ukraine has momentum and clear strategic objectives, while Russian soldiers are increasingly questioning their leadership. I suspect Ukraine will take more. I suspect Ukraine. What have I done? Sorry about that. I expect Ukraine will take more territory over the winter. So there you go. And he's then referring back to Ukraine has an advantage in manpower, learning lessons, interior lines, command and control or leadership, clearer strategic goals, precision fires, morale, ability to strike behind Russian lines, partisans, training, volunteers. Many of these will grow over time. I'm optimistic. So that is a really, really good point. And this is to say that Ukraine really should continue fighting and pressing on in the winter months, because Russia will only struggle more and more. A ceasefire or stopping the offensives from Ukraine's point of view will only help Russia. It will not help Ukraine. Anyway, there you go. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks for all your amazing comments in the comments threads on these videos. I really do appreciate it. I do read like a phenomenal amount of comments. I really have better things to do with my life, but evidently I don't, and I do too much of this. But thank you so much for supporting. Please like, subscribe, share, hit the bell, all those bell notification things, jobs, I don't know. And if you can support through Buy Me a Coffee, I really appreciate that, or PayPal or YouTube thanks, as some of you do. I really, really appreciate that. Thank you. And for those who have joined, big props to my new members, who I will tell you about in a second. But if you also want to support, pop onto uasupporter.com/ATP, and anything you buy from there, I get a small amount of commission, and I really do appreciate that. There it is. You can show your support for Ukraine, but also help my channel. Here are props to my members: Sabra Bursovic, Chindi Chimbaloo, Ricky Johnson, Vaguely Agnostic, Monkismo, Mitch Mazarol, Craig Mucklemore, or Mucklemore, John Nairich, Jonans Kilioris, Bo Janssen, RNH Endersby, Holly Irving, John Lloyd, and Andres Erdeviks. Thank you, one. Thank you all. Anyway, toodle pips. I will see you tomorrow. Or at least you'll see me.